Hello, and welcome to the Spoonie Authors Podcast, a podcast where we explore a different disabled author's stories each week. I'm your host, Diana Gunn, and joining us today is Elizabeth Barone. Elizabeth Barone writes books starring badass bells who choose the other path because her life is offbeat. Before publishing her debut novel, she was a chef, web designer, apprentice teacher, and retail soldier, but writing is her first love. It took a debilitating autoimmune disease to make her realize it was time to chase her dream. She has now published over a dozen contemporary romance novels and suspense novels. Hello, Elizabeth.
Hi.
It's great to have you on the show. I'm very excited for you to be here and to talk about our work. Specifically, can you tell us a bit about your River Reapers series?
I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me. So the series started off as my answer to kind of the kidnapped by the biker trope that I really dislike. I loved Sons of Anarchy. So when I found out that there was biker romances, I was really excited, but there's a lot of kidnapped by the biker books. So I find that trope a little bit problematic sometimes. And I'm also not a fan of the damsel in distress. I like writing heroines who are a little difficult and don't do what they're supposed to do. So, and I'm also a survivor of sexual assault. So I know a lot of other survivors, and I wanted revenge. So this series quickly became my way of rewriting some wrongs and also saying, look, we can have biker romance that aren't creepy. And here's a heroine struggling with PTSD and helping other survivors. So I decided to set it in a real town near my home city, which is my home city is Waterbury, and the town is Naugatuck. And I took a lot of liberties. For one, Naugatuck would never allow a strip club, I don't think. So the Wet Mermaid exists solely in my imagination.
Wow. Okay. Can you tell us a bit more about this kidnapped by a biker trope? This sounds completely insane to me as someone who is not in the romance world whatsoever. What?
So yeah, a lot of biker romances tend to start off where like the hero is like a president of another, like a rival club, and he kidnaps like the other president's daughter, so he's like holding her hostage, and yeah, it's not always.
That's so strange to me. That just
Yeah.
seems really bizarre. And I guess that's honestly why, a large part of why I don't really get into a lot of the conventional romance genres is that there's a lot of weird stuff like that that's, normalizing abuse or, like in this case, romanticizing Stockholm syndrome.
Right.
Realistically, that's really strange to me. And
Yeah.
I'm glad you're out there challenging that. So how many books do you currently have in the River Reapers series?
So right now there's 2 full-length novels and a novella, and I have the third full-length novel is coming out soon, sometime eventually.
Sometime eventually. Oh, I feel you.
It's also going to have a companion novella, so there will be 2 more
Ooh,
editions this year at some point.
that's awesome. And you're just gonna keep going until you run out of good ideas, I guess? You don't have
I
an end in mind?
I do. I kind of knew from the beginning where I was going with it. So there's going to be 4 books in total, and possibly maybe some more novellas, possibly if I can.
Very exciting. Um, Good luck. That is a lot to have on your plate, but it sounds really exciting. And so at this point, you've gotten through quite a few books in this series. You are like eyeballs deep in it. What has been the most exciting part of working on this so far?
Um, Probably it's a lot darker than my other stuff, first of all. So that part of it has been really fun. I get to kill people. It's a romance with a body count, so that has been a lot of fun. Um, but I really didn't know, how my readers were going to react to it because my other stuff was contemporary. It was very lighthearted, with like, covering some social issues, but not that dark. So I had no idea how people were gonna receive it, but they actually like right away they were like, "Oh my God, I love these two. I love Cliff and Olivia. They love that the books are essentially about trauma." Um, and as someone with PTSD who wasn't diagnosed until years after the traumatic events, I'm still very much discovering like how debilitating it can be. So I like exploring. It's basically its own chronic illness, and then on top of that, I have the autoimmune disease that was undiagnosed for so long and being dismissed by doctors. So that was also traumatic in a way. So with these books, I really wanted to zero in on PTSD and all the ways it can affect you. And
Oh.
also killing people is fun.
Yeah, and let me just say, romance with a body count is a great tagline. I hope that you go on to use this as the tagline for this series because I'm in. You have got me.
I really should. I don't actually, but I should.
Really should. But yeah, and I think that specifically the trauma that happens around medical stuff, even for people that don't have disabilities who just get injured, is something that we don't talk about enough as a culture.
Yeah.
And I think that is something that's really important to start breaking down and like actually discussing because that's a very real thing, and that just it makes everything that you're already going through as an injured or ill or whatever person so much worse, dealing with all the complications of the medical system and especially not being believed,
Yes.
which happens far, far more to women and especially to young women.
Yeah.
um, that was definitely my experience as well, was a lot of denial.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
You're too young to be in chronic pain.
Yes.
Stuff like
Heard
that.
that so
Uh,
often. Yep.
so, yeah. And have you found that it's been um, cathartic or helpful in your own processing of trauma to write this series?
Yes, and also, but in like a really difficult way. So, like when I was writing the second book, I really dove deep into trauma, and like writing it was so cathartic. But at the same time, it was also like I had to like really um, kind of get into the flashbacks. You know what I mean? To like instead of when you're writing, it's like it's a very emotional experience and a very like in your head experience, and trauma is already like very emotional in your head. So this second book in this series was probably the hardest book I've ever written, just for that alone. Just those scenes where she's um where Olivia is struggling with her trauma and trying to work through it and trying to just even live a normal life, and then all the flashbacks and just really like getting into that was the hardest thing I've ever done.
Yeah. Unfortunately, at least I don't know of any easy way to actually heal from your trauma. So,
Yeah. The only way out is through, really.
yeah. Um, so, let's expand on that a bit. What have been some of your biggest struggles, not just working on this series, but in building a career as a disabled author and producing over a dozen novels? That's an awesome achievement for anyone, right?
Yeah, still I don't know. Honestly, it's like I've been doing this since 2011, so it's like every year that I'm still active and still like in, still publishing, I feel like it's a huge accomplishment on its own because just watching, from way back with all these indie authors and not even necessarily like medical issues like stopping them from publishing, but just like the faces that were common when I was first starting out. People just got burnt out or like life happened and they all went away. So just like being here now is huge. Just like still publishing is huge for me. But I think like one of the biggest struggles I have is my body not cooperating. I have joint pain, so when I'm trying to write or to even just sitting at the computer is difficult. I have been through so many chairs. I was just tweeting like a couple days ago about I'm on like my third chair, like trying to find the one that is something I can actually sit in and be comfortable in. I've changed my whole setup a million times, like trying to make it more ergonomic. There's just some days where I just physically can't move. My hands won't move the way I want them to. They're too stiff, too sore. So I have to just kind of phone it in for the day. And I can't go, like my brain, even though I have a lot of brain fog now and I'm very slow now, my brain still wants to go fast. Like I was always a fast person before. So getting sick has slowed me down so much. And that alone has been so frustrating.
I feel you on that. And yeah, and it's so difficult when you can't be spending a lot of time at the computer because there's so much more to being an author than just writing.
Yep.
There's so much to keep up within the industry. There's so much happening all the time. Um, are there any strategies that you've developed to make it easier for you to keep up with your non-writing stuff that you have to do as an author?
So I've kind of had to adopt like a slow and steady mindset, where I know I kind of have to do a lot more planning. And um, for one thing, I keep a notebook of all my ideas. For every launch, I have a launch plan that is pretty detailed. It might not go the way I want it to, but it's gonna get me from point A to point B. And then I've really gotten into using like a promo company to help me expand my reach because I'm still small. I can't publish that frequently. So I'm not able to. I see a lot of authors like they're publishing multiple books a year, and I'm like, I'm lucky if I get one out. So um, to try to keep up, I often feel like, oh my God, I have to publish a book every 2 seconds to keep up, but that's not possible. So I've really gotten into hiring like a promo company that'll help me do like book blitzes, release um, cover reveals, um, and then like the actual like release blast. And then I've really gotten into advertising because, at least for me, it helps to have that steady sales coming in, so that even if it takes me months and months and months and months and months to write a book and then get it edited and then go through all the production, at least I know I'm still selling books and I'm not having to be hustling all the time. And because like I think probably like the best thing I've ever done is starting to do live events, like big multi-author signings. But that's hard. That takes such a toll on me. The next few days I'm wiped. So I don't do them as often. So having that like continuous advertising, having that kind of like boost of like, okay, I've got a promo company kind of like helping me so that I don't have to be at this computer all the time and I don't have to be trying to get out there all the time. It's really just like trying to find ways to be consistent, but keep the momentum going without killing myself.
Yeah, and I know plenty of completely able-bodied authors who struggle with that. It's a really difficult balance because there is so much pressure to be publishing books every 2 seconds. It's insane. And, I will have 2 books coming out this year, but one of them is a nonfiction workbook that's only going to be like 75 pages long. That's a completely different investment. When it comes to fiction, yeah, I'm lucky to publish 1 book a year. It's a real challenge, especially because my work, like the River Reapers series, really deals with trauma. And a lot of the time, in order to write those scenes, I need to sit in a really uncomfortable place for me
Yeah.
and then take a 3-hour nap after writing page and a half long scene because it's such a difficult thing.
Yep.
So I really appreciate you being honest about that because I think that's something that we don't talk about enough in the industry and that not enough people outside of the industry understand. a lot of people think publishing is glamorous and, think you're going to make a bunch of money off your first book. And unfortunately, that's not the reality of the vast majority of us.
No.
Every once in a blue moon, there is that one person who will make all their money on their first book. And because people just don't talk about everybody else, we have this image that really just gets soul-suckingly destroyed with every year you spend in the industry.
Yeah.
That glamorous image just falls apart a little bit more every year.
Yeah, and also, like as someone who I've been out of the workforce since 2014. So I have no, for the longest time, I didn't even have any income. Now I'm on disability, so I have, somewhat of an income, but we know it's not that much. So it's like really for me, it's been about figuring out how to maximize what I do have. And, if I can only publish one book a year, all right, fine. But at least I'm still in the game.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to try and reel this into a more cheerful note. So we all started writing because we love stories. And I wanted to know if there are any stories that have been really powerful for you as a reader that have meant a lot to you, and especially if there are any great stories with disability rep that you can recommend.
So, Bryn Greenwood recently released The Reckless Oath We Made, and the heroine in that book, it's a romance, but it's such an unconventional romance. The heroine has a bad hip, and she's also a difficult woman. And the hero is autistic, and he's also got this kind of like fantasy going. And he kind of thinks he's Don Quixote. And so we've got this heroine trying to find her sister, and she's got this hip that's always slowing her down. And then we got this hero who he thinks he's a knight. He is really a knight. He's like the most sweetest person ever. And just like alone, like just seeing this character that has like I have a terrible hip. So just seeing like, oh, here's someone that's more, like me, different circumstances, but that alone was huge for me. And it's like a gem because I don't really come across disability rep very often. It's out there, but it's still not quite mainstream. I think we're getting better at it, but we need to get better at it.
And that actually leads into my next question perfectly, which is how would you like to see disability representation change in the next 5 years? Not just in Romancelandia, but as a whole.
I want more of it, of course. There's not enough, and there's especially not enough healthy rep. I mean, I can't even, like, the first time I ever came across like any disability rep was in like YA. And that was a long time ago. And it was like a rare, like I can't remember the name of the book, but it was like, oh my God, there's a disabled heroine. So I started writing to help fill the hole, but I can't write, as fast as I would like to. I have so many ideas, but so little time. But I really want to see more disability rep where it's kind of the characters just living with their disabilities and they're just living a life instead of I like when it's the main plot, but I also want to see people just doing things. So, if it's sci-fi, I want to see the heroine is I don't know, a pilot or something, and she just happens to have a disability. And I want to see, like, in romance, I want to see more rep that isn't just like, I don't know, tragic, I guess is the word I'm looking for. But I just want to see more of it because I don't really see enough of it. I don't know if I'm looking in the wrong places or.
Can you talk a bit about the tragic disability in romance? What does that manifest as? What does that look like?
I mean, because I think it's important to have stories that cover both ends of it, like the whole like medical side of it and dealing with it, and how that impacts your life. But I also think it's important to have stories that it's not the whole story, if that makes sense. Like, I guess like the best example I can think of is like with like LGBT fiction. Like we have our coming out stories, so we have like our medical stories, but then like we also just have LGBT fiction where people are just living their lives. Like they're already out. It's not like an element. So with like the disability rep, even if it's not necessarily like a medical thing, um, I want to see more of on both ends of that. So more figuring out the diagnosis, or like the, like maybe there's a thriller that's about like getting the diagnosis, or I'm just kind of like spitballing and rambling, but like instead of like just one type of story where like I don't know if like tragic is like the right word, but like I mean we have like Me Before You, like the guy, I don't want to spoil it, but I think we know the I think we all know the story by now, but like he dies at the end. Like there's like
The Fault in Our Stars.
yeah, yeah, and I'm just tired like yeah. And like not it's not a book, but there was this series called Chasing Life, and it was like the greatest. I loved it so much. She was living with cancer, and then at the end it just like ended, so it just was canceled so suddenly, and the ending was just so jarring, and like it was just so tragic at the end. Like I don't want to see that anymore, like I feel like kind of I don't know. It's almost like it's almost like a fetish, almost like, oh, it's so sad,
Yeah. Yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense comparing it to a fetish. It reminds me of a TED Talk I watched once. I forget the name of the woman, but it was The Danger of a Single Story, and it was talking about how when we talk about Africa, we're always talking about poverty and, misery and war-torn countries and child soldiers and stuff like that, and the danger of having that single story. And I think the point you're trying to make is very similar here, is that it is dangerous to have a single story for disability. It makes it harder for people to see themselves in stories, and it also gives people a lot of misconceptions about disabled people.
Yes, you're so much more articulate than me. My brain is just mush at this point. But yeah, exactly.
I woke up like 3 hours ago. It's the middle of the afternoon. I, I'm in that fresh, bushy-eyed. I've been awake long enough that I no longer have the like just waking up fog, and I haven't been awake so long that I have I just worked a whole ton fog, so my brain is in peak condition right now.
I love when that happens.
Yeah, it's a really of course now I lose all of them.
It's a fine balance.
Yeah, it's a fine balance trying to get around brains.
Ugh,
Uh, the brain is a very complicated thing.
very much is.
All right. Is there anything else that you wanted to touch on before we wrap up? We do have a little bit of extra time.
I think I don't know. I can't think of anything. I think that I mean I was excited to find this podcast, so we could touch on that.
All right, then I will ask the final question, which is where can people find out more about you and your work?
So my website is elizabethbaronebooks.com, and I actually my biker romance novella Her Mercy is free, so you can get that on my website. And I'm trying to cut back on social media, so I am hanging out mostly on Instagram these days. So I'm at Elizabeth Barone.
All right. How is your challenge of trying to be on social media less going?
It's not. It's not.
Uh,
Emphasis on the word trying.
How it's really hard, and it can be such a distraction from the work that we're really supposed to be doing. Um, but I have also been trying with mixed success to be on social media less. So I think that's really a big theme in our culture right now is people are realizing how far down the rabbit hole they've gone and how much time that they're allowing these apps to suck out of their lives.
So much time. When I actually recently I stopped using, like, because I found that I realized that I was on Facebook for every possible thing, like, oh, I'm eating, let me just scroll through Facebook. Oh, I'm, you know, I've got 2 minutes, so let me scroll through Facebook. So I stopped doing that and I replaced it with reading, and I read so much more, and I was so much less like, oh, I wonder what's going on, like. But it's really it's almost like an addiction.
Absolutely. I mean, they are designed to, stimulate your endorphins and keep you on the sites. It really is built with an addiction framework if you look at it. There's been a lot of really interesting stuff coming out the last couple of years about what is happening, what effects social media is having in our culture. And like before now, I feel like a lot of the stuff that was out there was really just alarmist. But now we actually have a lot of the data to really understand what social media is doing to our brains and to our culture. And so I think now there's more of a real authentic push to cut back and to limit how much influence that has on our lives. Whereas before it was just a bunch of old people screaming the internet is dangerous and everybody else going, and so is everything. So is walking down the street,
It's almost like when your parents are telling you something your whole life and you're like, yeah, whatever, okay, whatever. And then you're like, oh my God, you were so right. That's how I
Right?
feel now with all the data. I'm like, oh my God, they were right.
Yeah, it's crazy. Anyway, I will thank you so much for joining us. I will let you go now. It's been a real pleasure to chat, and good luck with everything in your writing life and everything else.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Spoonie Authors Podcast. The Spoonie Authors Podcast is part of the Spoonie Authors Network, a community initiative devoted to sharing the stories of disabled authors and educating abled people about what life is like for disabled creatives. Transcripts of this podcast are also available on the Spoonie Authors Network. To learn more or become a contributor, visit spoonieauthorsnetwork.blog. And of course, if you enjoyed this podcast, make sure to leave a 5-star review on your favorite podcast streaming platform.